Even the infamous Templeton Foundation recognized that God is a scientific hypothesis by funding rather well-conducted double-blind trials to test whether remote prayer would speed the recovery of heart patients. So they had groups of patients recovering from heart operations, quite a large number of them in, I think, 4 different hospitals. And half of them, chosen at random, were prayed for, and the other half were not prayed for. The people doing the praying were not allowed to know who they were praying for. They were only given first names and the first initial of the surname. That was thought to be enough to tell God which hospital bed to... The results were that people who were anonymously prayed for had no tendency to recover more quickly than people who were not. No surprises there. What's slightly more interesting is that people who were prayed for and knew they were being prayed for actually got worse. And it's not difficult to think why. I mean, there's a kind of burden of expectation laid on them. But anyway, the point of telling that story is that at least the Templeton Foundation that funded the study acknowledges that that the existence or non-existence of God is a scientific hypothesis, testable, and they attempted to test it. There have been throughout history many arguments put forward in favor of the existence of God. The only one that's widely used today is the teleological argument, sometimes called the argument from design. It's the familiar watchmaker argument, which is surely one of the most superficially plausible bad arguments ever discovered. And it's rediscovered by just about everybody until they're taught the logical fallacy and Darwin's brilliant alternative. In the familiar world of human manufacture, of human artifacts, things like watches, cars, things that look designed are designed. And to naive observers, it seems to follow that similarly complicated things in the natural world, things like eyes and hearts, are designed too. It's not just an argument by analogy, there is a semblance of logical, actually statistical reasoning here. It's fallacious, but it carries a superficial illusion of plausibility. If you randomly scramble the fragments of an eye or a leg or a heart 1,000,000 times, you'd be lucky to hit on even one combination that could see or walk or pump. And this demonstrates that such devices could not have been put together by chance, any more than a watch could be put together by chance. And of course, no sensible scientist ever said that a heart or an eye or a leg or a body was put together by chance. Lamentably, the scientific education of most American and British students omits all mention of Darwinian evolution, and therefore the only alternative to chance that most people can imagine is design. The astronomer Fred Hoyle dramatized his own misunderstanding of natural selection as a theory of chance by likening it to a hurricane blowing through a junkyard and having the luck to assemble a Boeing 747. What he missed, of course, is that natural selection is anything but a chance process. Natural selection is a non-random process. It is the non-random survival of random variations. Even before Darwin's time, the impotence of the argument from design was glaring. How could it ever have been a good idea to postulate, in explaining the existence of complex, improbable things, a designer who would have to be even more complex and improbable than that which he's supposed to be creating? The entire argument always was a logical non-starter, as the philosopher David Hume realized before Darwin was born. What Hume didn't know was the supremely elegant alternative to both chance and design that Darwin was eventually going to give us. Natural selection is so stunningly powerful and elegant. It not only explains the whole of life, it raises our consciousness and boosts our confidence in science's future ability to explain everything else. Essentially, what's wrong with creationism, or intelligent design, which is another name for creationism, is that it's what the philosopher Daniel Dennett calls a skyhook. It explains nothing at all. A great hand comes out of the sky and does some manipulation on Earth, and that's supposed to explain something. But we never hear an explanation for how the hand got there in the first place. That's a skyhook. A crane is Dennett's analogy for something that really does do explanatory work. Natural selection is the crane par excellence. Natural selection is cumulative. It starts from simple beginnings and it gradually works up by slow degrees, slow incremental steps to the prodigious heights of complexity and improbability that we see in the living world. Never does natural selection postulate something wildly improbable. It only ever postulates slightly improbable things, a slight increment, a slight improvement, a slight bettering of what was already there. That's not too improbable to have come about by chance. What is too improbable to have come about by chance is the whole eye or the whole heart. And there's a huge difference between postulating the sudden coming into existence of an eye or a heart by chance, which is obviously ridiculous nonsense, and the gradual coming into existence of an eye or a heart, where each step of the way is only a slight improvement over what was already there before. Natural selection is not just an alternative to chance, it's the only ultimate alternative to chance that's ever been suggested. Design is a workable explanation for organized complexity only in the short term. It's not an ultimate explanation because the designers themselves demand an explanation. Yes, we can postulate a designer to explain a watch, a car, a computer, but we then need an explanation for where the designer came from, and that is provided by Darwinian natural selection. The great molecular biologists Francis Crick and Leslie Orgel once playfully speculated that life on this planet might have been deliberately seeded way back in the Precambrian by a space rocket sent by an alien intelligence containing a nose cone full of bacteria which started to sprout and to breed on this planet. Now, that's not a silly hypothesis, it's an amusing hypothesis. It was postulated as a kind of joke, but it's not totally silly. But you do see that that theory, although it might explain the origin of life on this planet, cannot explain the origin of life in the universe as a whole. We still have to go back to the aliens from outer space who sent the space rocket and say, where did they come from? And of course, we can push that back one stage further. If their form of life was seeded by a rocket from somewhere else, nevertheless, at some point, that regress has got to be terminated. At some point, you've got to postulate a real theory, a real crane, as opposed to a skyhook. A real theory that starts from primordial simplicity